Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. My name is Alan. With me, as always, is Gareth.
Hello.
Hello there. Today we're going for something what I would call a modern sitcom. It is
It's 20 years
25 years
old.
Yeah. Well, let's get straight to the point. We're dealing with Phoenix Nights.
Phoenix Nights.
Peter Kay's Phoenix Nights, yes. But I think I term kind of modern sitcom, I guess, from the very late 90s, early 2000s, because there was a real shift, and Phoenix Nights was part of that, of going away from the audience-facing sitcom to this your single-camera shoot. The Office is the obvious example, the Royal Family of Phoenix Nights.
We call it the modern style sitcom.
Yeah, there was just a little sweep of this where this was becoming the thing. So I'm putting this right at the cusp of modern sitcom.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And this is very much the Peter Kay story here. Peter Kay's Phoenix Nights. You don't see that on the screen, but that's what it was in the papers because Channel 4 wanted to call it Peter Kay's Phoenix Nights because he was the big name. He had done all the stand-up that he was famous for. So it was his name they were selling it on. And he was a little bit like, this is very much a collaboration. I'm not quite comfortable with that. So,
really?
So the compromise was, you can publicise it as that, but that's not going on screen. It's not going into the actual content of the programme. It is just Phoenix Nights.
Okay, so I tipped my hand slightly there, Alan, in that my perception, my received wisdom is that, Peter Kay was a bit of an egomaniac and everybody else was very much in his shadow. But I honestly, I'm not sure why I think that. I'm prepared to be talked out of that. So...
Well, I think this is an interesting thing to talk about, and I want to talk about it. So perhaps we will get a bit derailed before actually getting onto our sitcom element of this podcast. But I think it's
that's what this is all about.
Important background information. I've been thinking about this a lot over the last few weeks when I've been researching this. I've read Peter Kay's autobiography, the first one he did, which is called about his younger life. And I've been listening to interviews with the likes of Neil Fitzmaurice and Dave Spikey, who worked very closely with him. And I want to come here with the question, is Peter Kay a bit of a git?
Yeah.
And I want to just caveat this straight away by, I'm doing a lot of armchair psychology stuff here. I'm kind of reading into a lot of things. And, with all these things, you never get the full picture. And so I'm probably going to make some very speculative arguments here. Well,
that's what it's all about.
Not true at all. But let's go to early Peter Kay, right? Peter Kay at the Top of the Tower. That's what you referenced earlier. The stand-up DVD that made his name. And obviously that didn't come out of nowhere, but that was the thing that everybody suddenly went, oh my God, this is Peter Kay, he's a star.
Okay. So what year was that, Alan? What year did I get that for Christmas?
99, 2000, that kind of era. I'm not sure exactly.
Because absolutely everybody was watching that. That year, everybody got that DVD for Christmas.
And that's the important thing. It was everybody. And I think this is what Peter Kay's success in those early days, and let's not beat around the bush here, he was a phenomenon in 2001. Peter Kay was the biggest thing in comedy. And that success, I think, came off the back. I'll give you a very personal experience. I bought the Peter Kay Live at the Top of the Tower on VHS, I believe, not DVD. I bought that in HMV. Remember that? Remember HMV? Oh, what's that about?
Who remembers HMV, eh?
I'd seen him on Channel 5 when they did a bit of comedy, like live from the Comedy Store or whatever, where they do these little 5-minute bits. But that stand-up, I'd seen him a bit, so I saw his video. I was like, I liked him. Do you know what? I'm going to have a punt. I'm going to buy a video, whatever. I remember watching it and then immediately taking it to my parents and going, you're going to love this. Let's sit down and watch it together. Yeah. And how many times as a teenager did you go to your parents and go, I found something I want to share with you and I think we're all going to enjoy it together?
Yeah, do you know what, Alan? That's a good story because that really hits upon that universality of Peter Kay. He is was universally loved, or certainly admired.
And I think that was the crucial thing to his major success in the early days because, you got your old school comedy, alternative comedy came along and ripped that out. But alternative comedy was for the students, right? It was for the young people. There was this generation, and Peter Kay, I think, was one of the real forefront of that, of bringing that back together, bringing comedy back together. Yeah. And, he's certainly not take Jack D, for example, who was successful throughout the 90s, would appeal to lots of different people. I'm not saying Peter Kay reinvented comedy, but I think he really galvanized it and created a mainstream market again, or made TV producers realised that you could do Live at the Apollo every week and people would watch it. And people like Michael McIntyre or Mickey Flanagan, those types of people who are really in that style.
But the comedy DVD was a 10 or 15 year phenomenon.
Maybe not
which
even that,
every Christmas I would get 1 or 2 comedy DVDs and like them. You know, that was a big part of gift buying, of consuming comedy. And presumably it wasn't 10 years earlier, and it certainly isn't now.
And a very small window, and Phoenix Nights is a great example of that. Phoenix Nights, just like The Office, is one of those things that really found an audience on DVD.
Yeah.
Did all right on TV, did well enough to get a second series, won awards, all that sort of thing. But the DVD market really made people go, ooh, hello. Yeah, that was that kind of 15-year period where you get the director's commentary, you get the actor's commentary, you get the deleted scenes on the thing. All that stuff that we don't really get now, and didn't get in 1997 either. So, it was a brief period, and there was some real successes from it.
Yeah.
So, Peter Kay, again, let me give you a brief sort of overview of his kind of career before this. Like, how did we come to Phoenix Nights? He was a bit of a class clown all his life, I don't want to presume too much, but he was the fat, funny kid, right? And I think... Like, it seems like at school he hung around with, like, the bad kids, the nutters, I believe he calls them. But he wasn't, like, a bad kid. He was the one who was funny, and he would hang around with the bullies so that he didn't get bullied. That's the read I got from it, But then he develops, obviously, like, wants to perform. That was his kind of real thing. He kind of did the school drama club, and that was kind of just ignited a passion for him. And so he's working in his teens and 20s, just working a series of dead-end jobs. And, like, lost, doesn't really know what to do, wants to get into performance, but has as a working class kid from Bolton, has no avenue of how that even works.
Yeah.
And the avenue he found, he saw people like Steve Coogan and John Thompson in sort of nearby Manchester and all that. Stand-up was the way in. Stand-up was a way that he could just go to a pub, get up and do an open mic slot, and get into the world of performance.
That's really interesting. So if I can prematurely give you my take on Peter Kay, I think that he is a performer first and foremost, and a really, really skilled performer. I think that if you look at someone like, let's say, Barry Cryer. Like, Barry Cryer was comedy royalty, but he was a writer. Like, you don't really see him performing. So he was obviously a really funny guy, really creative guy, but didn't have quite that performance gene. I think Peter Kay is the opposite. I think if you write down the script for Top of the Tower, and I read it out, I would not get laughs.
Yeah.
He does. Peter Kay is a funny guy. He is a performer. That's interesting that's his route in. It's not so much that he's got all this great material that he's got to share with the world. It's just he wants to get up on stage and perform.
Yes, I agree. I think that he has, whatever it is, he has it. He is a charming personality, and he had very immediate success in stand-up. The way he tells it, in terms of, like, he had all this material kind of prepared, and then he went up on stage and sort of lost his bottle and just started talking about his mum, and, and like told these funny stories from his childhood and stuff, and, went down a storm. So that's not to say his material isn't sort of written and prepared, but, he just had to let his personality come through, and he was a huge success. And kind of entered a talent competition, and won it, and basically got pretty immediate notice, and didn't work the circuit for very long because he was just so successful so quickly. As opposed to most comedians who have kind of worked their way up.
But like you said earlier about the not pigeonholing him into a certain... Like, for example, he could play a comedy club. He could probably play the Phoenix as well. He could play a working men's club to those pensioners and entertain them too.
Yeah, that explains why they came to write Phoenix Nights. There was a love and affectionate for those characters, even though they are taking the mick and they kind of know how ridiculous it is. But they were kids brought up in that environment. Their parents were at that club. They performed at those clubs and had to kind of adjust their act accordingly to make it work. Dave Spikey particularly had worked those clubs for 10 years. He was a bit older. So that really comes across that Peter Kay mines reality, his real life, for his material, and we see that, But there's that laughter of recognition. What he manages to.
Everybody. We've already done it. Everybody takes the mickey. Oh, remembers Chewits, But that's the point. When you write it down or tweet it sarcastically, it's not funny. But he's funny. He is funny.
Exactly. So in the last 20 years, I feel like there has been a bit of a turn where he's perhaps a victim of his own success, where it's just like, well, you're just naming things from your past. Like, that's not funny. But obviously it is. It works. What he does works.
Yeah.
I think even going back and watching Live at the Top of the Tower now, it doesn't quite hit in the same way, because now there's 50 comedians on telly that do that kind of thing. And like I say, I'm not saying Peter Kay invented the idea of talking about things for laughs, but it was such a huge success.
Observational comedy is a thing. Observational comedy is a genre. But you know, if I said, name me 3 observational comedians, like everybody is naming Peter Kay in their top 3.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he just took it to its kind of end point, where there's not really any jokes at all. He is just going, hey, do you remember Walnut Whips? What's that about? but it makes
See,
it
we're
work.
doing it, aren't we? We're doing it. We're both taking the mickey. But I tell you what, if he was on stage and he said, "Who remembers Walnut Whips?" What was that about? The audience would be laughing their asses off.
Yeah. I want to say I have a great deal of love and joy from Peter Kay and his material. So I think I'm going to be slightly negative about his overall personality. So I just want to set that out first of all. I think he is.
I tell you what,
a really nice.
How many
guy
people?
as well.
How many people open the freezer and see garlic bread in there and don't do that? There must be like 9 or 10 people in the UK who don't go garlic bread.
I was trying to explain this to my American friend, and I showed her some clips from Top of the Tower, and she just went, "This is so English."
How dismissive. But actually, very correct.
Yes.
It is so English.
Yes,
it is.
Let me tell you what I feel about Peter Kay, and something that I just kept coming back to the more and more I watch of him, that he's this generation's Ronnie Barker.
Okay. Hang on a minute.
That's a big let that
just sit. Carry on.
That is a big statement, and I'm saying it. I think he is an absolutely amazing comedy actor. I think he is genuinely a good actor. And even within these comedy roles, there's a lot of nuance, a lot of really kind of emotional, genuinely emotional stuff. There's not a huge amount of that kind of weight in Phoenix Nights, but there's some there. And we'll talk about that Peter Kay thing in a minute, but he can play a wide range of characters, and he embodies them significantly. He really does bring them to life.
If we just keep this to Phoenix Nights for a minute, he plays 3 characters in Phoenix Nights.
Yes,
he plays
does.
Brian Potter, he plays Max the bouncer, and then he plays Keith Lard in the fire episode. There's range there. There's range in one episode.
And Brian and Max, they're very distinct characters. They're completely different, but they're not like... These are huge comedy characters, and so one's like totally different to this. They're both grounded in reality. They're both realistic people.
I think Max in particular, the performance as Max is almost drowning in pathos. It's a really good acting performance.
Exactly. I think he's absolutely fantastic. And considering how inexperienced he was at this point, you know, he did like a 2-year BTEC in drama or something, or whatever. I can't remember the exact title of it was. Media performance, I think it was, at Salford University.
Right.
That's kind of drama school, but not quite, if you know what I mean. But also, it's a raw talent. He's about 28 or something when he was filming Phoenix Nights. You know, hadn't been acting for very long, mostly known as a stand-up. That is just pure talent right there, and that's not obvious from a stand-up routine. He was famous as a stand-up. There's no reason why that should have transferred that well. But I just think that's...
He's a performer.
Because he's got a great skill.
Do you know what? I'm being a lot nicer about Peter Kay than I was expecting to be.
Okay, let's flip to the other side. And I read his autobiography. And what I get from that, certainly when he's talking about his early acting experiences, most obvious one being playing the lion in his school production of Wizard of Oz when he's 16.
Right.
It was and he's telling this story as this is where I learned that I love to perform and I love comedy. He's the lion in Wizard of Oz. There's a song going on. He's not really involved. So he just starts pissing about, literally, like he cocks his leg up on the tree and he's running around and he's dancing and he's
getting laughs.
And he's getting loads of laughs. He's loving it. Completely upstaging everyone else and ruining the scene that is actually supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
And I think that is quite central to the stories I read in his autobiography.
Yeah.
Like, he wants to be the funniest one in the room. He wants to be laughed at. in a good way. And he will upstage you to do that. And I'm sure he's very professional when he's working with other people. But the stories from his autobiography when he's young very much fall into that category. This production was a bit crap, so I just did funny things and made it better.
Yeah.
It never quite says, but I was young, I know that's unprofessional, but hey, it was a crap production, I'm going to do it, whatever.
Yeah.
He never says that. There's never a sort of sense of recognition of, I probably shouldn't have done that, but I did it anyway because I wanted to be funny. I've learned better, I'm better than that now. So, yeah, that's where the bit of a gitness comes into it. Or perhaps what you were talking about, egotistical, selfish?
Maybe. Well, okay, Alan, when you were saying that description of the lion in the play, there's a scene in Phoenix Nights where it's talent track, and there's a singer trying to sing a heartfelt song, and Right Said Frank are doing silly sound effects and ruin it, and she cries. Like that's exactly what plays out there.
Yeah.
So you must. Point. So is there some self-awareness there, or zero self-awareness there?
So, yeah, I mean, obviously one assumes that he is at least professional when he's... I'm not, it's different when you're at college and you don't know what you're doing and et cetera, et cetera. But also, he was successful as a stand-up. That translated into doing, here, do a sketch thing, do this on the Sunday show. He's just getting his foot in the door, et cetera, et cetera. So then Comedy Lab, which is a stream of kind of comedy pilot type things, they come along to him and say, do something for us. And what he did was The Services.
Yes.
Which is essentially a pilot to that Peter Kay thing, for all intents and purposes. But it's set in a service station in Manchester, wherever it is. And Peter Kay plays every role. So,
yeah.
Is this where you're getting the egotistical idea from?
I have seen this. I can't remember when or where, but I have seen this. But yeah, he plays everyone.
But do you know what? The weird thing is, I just rewatched this yesterday. And, Sian Gibson is in it. She kind of has, a little bit of interaction. And Paddy McGuinness has one line, is before he was Paddy McGuinness, if you know what I mean. But then in the credits, it just kind of went, written and performed by Peter Kay with Sian Fulks, as she was at the time. And I was like, what about the rest of the cast? How come? And literally just clicked in like, hang on, yeah. There were other people in it, but, like one line here and there, featured extra kind of thing. Everyone in that was played by Peter Kay. And obviously, I recognised that it was Peter Kay, but I hadn't recognised that there was no one else in it because it felt so
Everyone
seamless.
was Peter Kay.
Yeah, he's playing 6 different roles in that, but they're all so fully embodied. And, like, he's playing a middle-aged woman who's the manager. He's playing the Charlie FM DJ. He's playing a truck bus driver, They're all very distinct and completely three-dimensional characters, and that's his skill. That's his as a writer and as a performer.
Move on to that Peter Kay thing then, because I think that continues.
So the Services was a mockumentary. It was a sort of spoof of those fly-on-the-wall documentaries like The Cruise, the airports,
big
all
at the
that
time,
sort of stuff. Very of its time. That's late 90s TV. That was what they were doing in the 90s. It was really cheap to produce.
Early reality television, yeah.
Yeah.
What was the name of that woman who couldn't pass her driving test?
Maureen.
Maureen, that's right.
It gets name-checked in the Services very specifically because one of the characters is like, they gave that Maureen a chat show. I think what might happen to me.
Yes, that's right.
That Peter Kay thing was the same, but just with different settings. They were all of that mockumentary style. Andrew Sachs to narrate it, which was exactly the sort of job he would do as a narrator, so it fit perfectly.
But Alan, how did that come about? Channel 4 said, make us 6 programmes, 6 mockumentaries.
Well, he did The Services. That was part of Comedy Lab Stream. That's like a kind of one-off thing that they do, and it's just it enables them to nurture talent. And it was successful enough that they went, all right, give us more of that. And so rather than trying to develop that into something, they kind of took that idea, that core idea, and created these different ones. And when I say they, I mean Peter Kay and Dave Spikey and Neil Fitzmaurice.
Ah, right. So that's when they got together. So how did they get put together then? I should say we're going to talk a bit more detail about Dave Spikey and Neil Fitzmaurice in the second half. But yeah, tell us about how they all met.
Yeah, we'll not go into their biography too much, but basically on the circuit. Dave Spikey, been around long enough that he was comparing shows, and he was the compare...
Without compare.
with compare without compare, for Northwest Comedian of the Year 1997, which Peter Kay won.
Right, okay.
And Dave Spikey, as a previous winner, was hosting it. And so that's where they met. They're both from Bolton. They got on. They stayed in touch. Same way, Neil Fitzmaurice and Peter Kay, they were it wasn't Northwest Comedy of the Year, but some very similar BBC-run comedy competition. They both kind of went from their region, Northwest, to the final.
Okay.
And so they just met.
They just knew each other from the circuit.
Yeah. So that's it, really. And Peter Kay was like, they're asking me to write something. Do you want to help me? And he asked the people who, he got on with and worked well with. So they together wrote That Peter Kay Thing, and one of those episodes in That Peter Kay Thing is called In the Club and is basically a pilot for Phoenix Nights. And That Peter Kay Thing is very much based on Peter Kay's experiences. And I'll tell you exactly why I know that, because he writes all about it in his autobiography. It's really interesting to read because he's saying how he just loved real people and real conversations, and he would literally record things like his family. He would just put when he was a kid, teenager, he would put a tape recorder on the table and just record them, and they kind of just got used to it. And then he would listen back to them, and it was just like that rhythms of real life language. He loved that stuff. That's obviously played into his writing, this very naturalistic style that we get. And he name checks specifically the royal family as a inspiration on him in terms of, you can just write real people and it's funny. You don't have to put gags in it. It's okay. So he's doing all that. Obviously, he's not thinking in terms of necessarily, I'll turn this into a script someday. But, it's obviously, that's where he's getting all his inspiration from.
Yeah.
In his book, he's telling stories about when he was 19 and he worked in a bingo hall. And it is, situation for situation, and often word for word, the episode of That Peter Kay Thing where there's he's playing a kid who works in the bingo hall. He also plays the bingo caller, but everything he's talking about in the book is almost word for word what's in that episode. And the same with a couple of the other things. One of the characters, Leonard, who's one of the characters, the oldest newspaper boy in the country, was based on a bloke he knows. And when I say based on, it was just Peter Kay's impression of him, often using his words, because he would tape record this kind of slightly, addled old man who was everyone thought he was weird, but Peter Kay was like, "Oh, you're fascinating. Tell me your stories."
So you've prompted me there. Is this something where he might have got into trouble? Because the episode of Phoenix Nights where they have Keith Lard, there's a disclaimer at the end of it saying this is not Keith Laird, who's the Bolton fire inspector, or something like that. Like he's not even bothered to change the name. Okay,
so this is an interesting example because if you're taking things from reality quite that directly, stop naming real people.
That's an observational comedy reference that's too tight. You don't need to name names.
But okay, so here's the thing: in Peter Kay's third book, which only came out last year, and it's about his experiences in TV. He doubles down and says, "This is all coincidence. I never met the man. It was just pure coincidence." Which I assume he's just doing to cover himself legally, because that's obviously not true.
So it's a fire inspector in Bolton
with a Scottish
Keith Laird. He's called Keith Laird, and we're calling him Keith Lard by coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. So that's obviously not true. But I will say, rather than just lying, he's covering himself, legally speaking. But I actually, Neil Fitzmaurice didn't get that memo, because I heard him in an interview talking about it. And he said, Peter came with this character, Keith Lard, the finicky fire safety officer, he's a real Jobsworth. And they were like, good character, great. And then just in their kind of general discussions, they were like, let's throw something really kind of wacky in there. Oh, he shags dogs, right? So that's the kind of the wild card element that they just put in for kind of comedy value. And then, lo and behold, they put it out there, and the real Keith Laird wasn't happy about it.
No, who would have thought?
Which would be like,
get that joke.
If you portrayed this obviously real person as like, oh, he's real Jobsworth and he's a bit of an annoying git, that you can see why they'd be put out by that. But the shagging dogs bit was definitely a step too far.
Yes, which is a plot point.
And the way Neil Fitzmaurice tells it, Peter Kay rang him up and said, "Oh, we're in trouble. This has happened." And he went, "Well, what? That's a real person." I was like, "Well," he didn't tell them that. Didn't even change the name.
I'll tell you what, right, though, we're laughing about it, and, you know, if you were Keith Laird, that's not funny.
No.
But it's startlingly naive, and maybe that's a little gittish. It's the same as cocking your leg as the lion on stage. You're just not thinking about how your actions impact other people.
That's exactly what I thought, yeah. And, you know, let's be fair, he was young, which is 27 is, you know, you should know what you're doing, but, you know, young in the industry and all that sort of thing. And I think you don't quite realise, this is going to be seen by the nation, and it's going to have an effect.
But it's getting a laugh. And so it doesn't matter that it's ruining the show. It doesn't matter that it's ruining someone's life. Yeah. It's getting a laugh. That's the only measure.
And if you went to that bingo hall in Bolton and watched the Eyes Down episode of that Peter Kay thing, you would recognise everyone there, and you would kind of go, "Oh, that's so and so."
Yeah,
it's too direct. Dave Spikey said in something I was listening to. He said, "Oh, I go to clubs and people go, oh, that Jerry St. Clair, it's based on so-and-so up at our club, isn't he?" And he says, like, I take that as a real compliment because everyone thinks it's based on someone they know because it was this kind of amalgamation of those kind of old school compares.
Sure.
But with Peter Kay, it's always based on someone very specific.
It absolutely is. There's something here about this. You know, I've already said he is the observational comedian number one. And this is observational comedy to the extreme, isn't it? You're just observing and regurgitating real life. And I don't want that to sound dismissive. I'm not saying that he's not adding something. Of course he is. But what he's adding is performance. It's not really writing. He's just taking the reality, but he's performing it, and that's what makes it funny.
Yeah, and performing it very well, obviously, as well. That's obviously important.
Yeah, again, I'm not denigrating that.
Yeah. Shall we, off the back of that, jump into Phoenix Nights? That Peter Kay thing was a big success. In the same way of, let's relate it to Ronnie Barker again. The same way of 7 of 1 gave us Porridge and Open All Hours.
Yeah.
There was enough material here that they decided to do something with it. Dropped the kind of mockumentary style angle. Obviously decided that wasn't going to be a long-term thing. But largely, the characters we get in Phoenix Nights are similar to what we got in that Peter Kay thing. A few little tweaks here and there, but it's kind of the body of it is there in that pilot.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about Phoenix Nights then. So we're going to specifically talk about Series 1, Episode 4, Singles Night, which is where Brian gets a girlfriend briefly. Mm-hmm. We're going to go through that episode, but let's do a little bit of setup. So tell us about the Phoenix and the sort of backstory.
So in that Peter Kay thing, in that episode, Brian is running this club, he's the social secretary, and the club gets burned down in potentially suspicious circumstances. It's not the first time one of his clubs has been destroyed. It could all be an insurance job. So the beginning of Phoenix Nights is the rebirth, the club reborn. It's the Phoenix from the ashes. So they are starting again. And now Brian is the manager / owner. I guess he doesn't own the building, but, it's...
He's the licensee.
He's the licensee, yeah. He's certainly in charge. And we have a little regular cast of characters and just the sort of people who would be working a club in the north, the northern club circuit.
We'll talk about the characters as we sort of come across them in the episode. But there's a couple of occasions where they're all sort of sat, having a meeting, or when they're at the end of each episode when they're auditioning turns. And I kind of looking around them and thinking, you're all characters. I get where you all fit in this drama. But what's your actual job? Like what are you doing for a living here? What are you being paid to do?
Yeah.
I couldn't quite figure that out for all of them.
Well, I was like Les and Alan, Jerry's backing
Les
band.
And Alan
They're on the board.
What about Kenny and young Kenny? Like, what are they doing for a living? Why are they there?
But they are just the cast. They're the characters that you would get in a club, and they're also there is obviously an element that Brian has surrounded himself with people he can manipulate.
Yes.
Jerry is the very major example of that, who's kind of a bit too easily manipulable, and they have fun with that in terms of Jerry standing up occasionally, and in the second series particularly.
Yeah.
But again, all based on very realistic kind of portrayals that, the social secretary who's the little Napoleon of the club and like rules it with an iron fist and all that sort of thing.
So the episode starts rather splendidly with a prank call from Peter Kay to Peter Kay.
Yes.
Peter Kay is playing two characters in the main cast. So he's playing Brian Potter, as you described just there, but also Max, one of the bouncers. So let's talk about Max.
Yeah, so in the pilot, Max and Paddy, the bouncers, are brought in to the club because it's a big night. It's Talent Trek final, so they need a bit of security. And so they're not like that. But by the time we get to the full show, they're just the regular dorm and they're there the whole time.
They're part of the cast.
A lovely duo. They kind of always come together. It's Peter Kay and Paddy McGuinness.
Classic double act.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and basically Paddy is... Paddy McGuinness was not an actor, it was Peter Kay's mate from childhood, and so they've very much kind of based it on his personality, as we will see with most of our supporting characters. So they're really just letting him kind of bring out that side of himself.
Yeah, Paddy's a bit of a jack the lad, isn't he? He's got an eye on the ladies.
And he's a very handsome man as well. He's
a good-looking boy.
A great body.
Whereas Max is a sort of... Max is a sort of he's kind of older brother figure.
Yeah.
And we never really learn what heartache has gone before, but he's clearly a very damaged man. But what I like about this is that it's exactly that. It's never explicit. It's never explained. But, there's real pathos behind his eyes. It's a good acting performance, and I think it's a really well drawn out character.
Yeah, there's a lovely moment in this very episode. I'll just jump ahead to it. Paddy is chatting up young Mary at the bar. He's doing his thing, and we get a little moment of Max just looking over and then sort of going, "Hey, go on, Paddy," and then sort of wistfully staring into the distance. Of just sort of
a rueful look into the middle distance.
And it's not explained. We do get a bit of more backstory when we get to Max and Paddy's road to nowhere. We'll talk about that in a bit. But
you see, I didn't get beyond the first episode of that.
Well, I'll talk about that later. But yeah, we do get more backstory. But there's just this sense that he's... How old is he supposed to be? 35?
It's difficult to tell, isn't it?
He's not an old man, is he? He's not like...
He's a 28-year-old man in makeup, so it's hard to say.
But yeah, Paddy is very much the opposite, who's just sort of living his life with no concern for the consequences.
I will say this, though, because this sort of ruined Max for me, and I want it to ruin it for you and our listeners as well. He looks very much like late-stage Steven Seagal.
No, I mean...
It's the black hair dye and the facial hair.
Yeah. I think they're having a conversation like, who play you in a film? Oh, Steven Seagal, definitely. Nobody else could do it.
Yeah. But he looks just like him.
But yeah, what we get here is, a cold open, essentially. It's just there's no setup, it's just a gag. And... it kind of sets up something that pays off later, but it really needs to be a standalone gag. And it is just a prank phone call. They're just winding up Brian, who gives them exactly the response they want.
Well, all we need to know, Mr. Potter, did he have false teeth?
Did he what? False teeth? The pissing hell should I know if he had false teeth? Who is this? Hey! I know who you are. Who are you?
Again, this is a lovely bit. I think this is very typical of sort of Peter Kay's finding the reality writing, where Brian is getting annoyed at them on the phone. He goes, "I know who you are. Who are you?" But to be able to deliver that without it kind of feeling forced, it's very nice stuff.
Yeah, very good, very good. So let's get further into the episode then. The next morning we're at the Phoenix, and it's singles night tonight. So we get a little skip across our characters and see how they're reacting to the idea of a singles night. Paddy's really excited because there's going to be loads of single women. And Max just seems very sad. We get Les and Alan, who are the band, Les Alanos.
Yeah.
And did you see how Les just sort of quietly takes his wedding ring off?
I know, that's lovely, isn't it? Yeah, just setting up the scene.
Should we talk about Les and Alan?
Yeah.
So they're the band, they're the backing band. We get a bit of a subplot with them at some point in the series where they're leading this youth group who are doing Karate Kid the musical, which provides some laughs.
That's quite nice, yeah.
But who are Les and Alan? Who are the actors?
So it's Toby Foster and Steve Edge.
Yeah.
So Toby Foster... was just he's a northern stand-up. He was just on the circuit, they knew him. Most of this casting seems to be people they knew and had worked with, and I'm not saying necessarily parts were written for them, but definitely they were bringing very similar personalities through. So whether it was just very good casting, I think it was probably, we know someone who's like that, they'll fit that. So Toby Foster, was a stand-up and doesn't do a lot of acting. We have seen him actually.
Isn't he a radio presenter?
He's presented the breakfast show on BBC Radio Sheffield for the last 20 years. So that's kind of his bread and butter, I guess. But we saw him in an episode of Extras. Do you remember?
No. He was playing extras.
So in extras, when Andy Millman goes on Celebrity Big Brother, this is in the special.
Yeah.
One of the other celebrities is Northern Comic.
Yes, he is. Yes.
Unnamed Northern Comic, Toby Foster.
Unnamed Northern Comic.
And he's done.
Very good casting.
He's in one episode of Derek. He's in one episode of Afterlife, stuff like that. But like, he's not really an actor by any means.
No. I wonder how he got into the Gervais circle.
Yeah, I don't know. But maybe they were just looking for a Northern Comic and just got it for that.
Yeah.
Like all of these actors, like I'm going to say, I think because they've been fit to the characters so well, I think it all comes across really nicely, this very naturalistic style.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
But also not that surprising that some of them haven't done a load of acting since.
The other one's Steve Edge. He is an actor, isn't he? Have I seen him in other things?
Oh, yeah. Steve Edge has probably had more acting work than anyone else in this entire cast. Although he did do stand-up comedy, if I'm correct, and I've sort of read this information somewhere, he was at Salford University with Peter Kay and Sian Gibson. So that's kind of how he knew him. So I think he was an actor, performer, and then kind of did a bit of stand-up as well, as opposed to being a stand-up. And yeah, he's gone on to do other things. He's a very well-remembered guest appearance on Peep Show. Just one episode, but he becomes David Mitchell's friend, and then turns out he's a Nazi. So that's
I do remember. Yes, I remember that episode.
It's no, he's a Nazi,
a literal Nazi.
And yeah, if we could have a little look at what else he's done, actually, more recently, he wrote a show called Starlings, which I don't know anything about, but he wrote and acted in it. It was a sitcom, Starlings.
That rings a bell.
Remember that? I don't know. He was in a few series of Benidorm. Definitely the later years of Benidorm, it came a real revolving door of different actors and that sort of thing. But most recently, he's been in the Madame Blanc mysteries with Sally Lindsay.
Oh, Sally Lindsay, who is a guest appearance in this.
Who turns up in this episode very
girlfriend.
Briefly. Yeah, so, but that's her creation, I believe, Madame Blanc mysteries. It's her thing. Robin Asquith's in it. But Steve Edge is, regular in that main character.
Yeah. So an actual actor.
Yeah.
Very good.
Which, like I say, not many of these people are, really. Even the ones who have done acting, it's not really their kind of bread and butter.
Okay, let's continue our tour of the room. The next people we see are Kenny talking to Brian, although he's not really talking to him, they're just talking across each other. This is such a good example of comic timing.
Rolled over. Guess who's lying next to me? Bonnie Langford.
Look at that lot. They're like pigs on heat.
Nearly broke her back.
So Kenny's thing is he's just an absolute liar. He's just a complete bullshitter.
Yeah.
Kenny is my favourite of the ensemble characters. He is my favourite. Every time he says something, it makes me laugh.
Yeah, that's Archie Kelly who plays Kenny Dalglish.
Yeah, so I don't think I know him from anything else.
He's a stand-up. He's very much a stand-up. He's got the odd acting appearance, but it's as a stand-up might. He's in one episode of Cradle to Grave with which Peter Kay starred in.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. I enjoyed that.
But yeah, he is very much a stand-up, and still seems to be working, still gigging. He must be pretty old by now. I don't know if he's in his 70s.
But like I say, the comic timing and some of his interventions are really good. So it doesn't surprise me that he's a comedian.
Well, speaking of writing parts for the actors, Google Archie Kelly doing a bit of stand-up. His intonation is very much that kind of phrasing. See him being interviewed just as him, maybe not him as a person, but him kind of presenting himself as a comedian. It's like not a in-depth personal interview, but doing a radio show or something. It's the intonation and is exactly the same as Kenny Senior, and so that's obviously his style.
Taking photos there, you're not the DSS, are you? No. Can you just write on it, he had a bad back? Alright. Sorry. All the girls in the audience, give me a big cheer, girls. Because I know what you're thinking, girls, a few more drinks, I could shag him, I know that. Yeah, well, I've got bad news for you, I'm not having any more to drink. Oh, so think on.
I'm sure he doesn't lie quite the same way, but I think it's directly written. They wanted this character who was a bullshitter, and it's just like it suited him perfectly. So I think they brought him in for that.
Yeah. So the next thing is Jerry arrives. He's got a new suit on, which is like Jerry wears the same thing every episode. So this is notable that he's got a different suit and shirt on. And we're told through dialogue that he's wearing some aftershave. He stinks.
Yeah.
And it did make me realise, we'll talk about Dave Spikey later, but the character of Jerry St. Clair, so he's the compare without compare. And he's obviously, like him and Brian are they're friends. Like we see Jerry driving Brian home, and they're obviously been known each other for a long time. But that's all I know about Jerry. Like, is he married? What's his backstory?
We don't get much backstory for Jerry, other than he's, obviously worried about his health. He's a bit of a hypochondriac. Yeah. But no, there's certainly no evidence of him being married or anything like that.
But he's sympathetic, isn't he? He's sympathetic.
Oh,
like you want to put your arm around Jerry.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, we don't see much of Jerry in this episode, and certainly we don't see him performing. So let's take this opportunity now to talk about Jerry the performer, and perhaps a bit of Les Alanos as well. He's your classic clubland compere. He knows all the crowd work. He's got a beautiful manner. All the old ladies love him.
And he's not afraid to sing a song.
The men aren't threatened by him. Yeah. And as all good club performers know, you end with a song.
Yeah.
He is a crap singer, though, isn't he? I don't know.
And I said he's not afraid to sing a song. I didn't say he was good.
I'm not sure how that much of that is a deliberate choice or if it's just Dave Spikey's singing. And Les Alanos, the best backing band in Clubland. And
Clubland.
They... I love Toby Foster particularly, like when they're doing a little bit of backing singing, and it's just absolutely no emotion to it. It's just like a miserable old man sat behind a drum kit.
Very good.
It's great.
It's very good.
Oh, he's like usually got a fag on while he's doing it.
Back to our scene. So we've seen Jerry. Then we get a little bit of Ravon. So Neil Fitzmaurice, who's playing Ravon, who is... he's recruited as an electrician in the first episode when the power goes out. But he's also the DJ. And we see him doing various other things, sort of handyman, and runs the fun fair, that sort of thing.
The louder you scream, the faster the ride. Remember, fun is the key, but keep seated at all times or you may die. Shabba!
Is he supposed to be like from a travelling family? Is that's the background here? But there's this subplot where Brian thinks he's a murderer.
Yeah, you've used the phrase "travelling family" there. That's not the phrase they use in the show.
No, it's not.
The parlance of the time. But I think that's the idea. Yes, and he's been working the fun fair. He's a carny. We'll talk about Neil Fitzmaurice a little bit later. But yeah, he was one of the writers, and so he's not in. He is in some of that Peter Kay thing, but not in the Clubland one. But they obviously just decided to write a character in for him. And I love it. Ravon, he never plays a big role. He's usually kind of in the background. But I do love it every time. He's just like... When he says Shabba after... Oh, man, it gets me every time.
After everything. Every single song.
It's just like, Will the owner of a Ford Escort, blue, it's blocking the driveway, please move it. Shabba. Yeah, very good, very good.
Anyway, so Brian, the first couple of episodes have set this thing up that Brian thinks he's a murderer and that his girlfriend's been murdered and disappeared.
Yeah, which is just because Les goes, oh, he murdered someone, did you not know? Like, they're just winding up.
Oh, that's right. Les plants the seed in his head. Yeah, that's right. Brian sees Ravon talking to this girl and he thinks, oh, I'm going to rescue this girl before she becomes his latest victim. And, of course, it turns out that she's his girlfriend, the one that he thinks has been murdered. Played by Sally Lindsay.
Yes, a little sort of early days guest appearance there from Sally Lindsay before she went on to, was it Coronation Street she made her name on? It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, Corrie, yeah.
You know what, this struck me, this scene where he just wheels over to Tracy and kind of chats to her. Like, there's some really good acting in this scene. Like him just being genuinely concerned for a stranger and having to sort of furtively kind of try and warn her. But it's a great performance. It is just really nice. It's not a big comedy, silly performance, which it easily could be.
Yeah.
And I think that, like I say, not to go on about too much, but I just think Peter Kay is an excellent actor.
Okay. So now we get a crucial moment in the episode where Brian, having spoken to Tracy, accidentally, quote, runs over the foot of Beverly, who was a punter who we've never seen before.
Yes, she's just a one-off guest appearance for this episode.
This is the start of what becomes a little romance. So firstly, Beverly's played by Jo Enright. Where do we know Jo Enright from?
Jo Enright, she's a funny, wasn't she? She's one of those people you see all over the place, but at this point she wasn't hugely well known. She was in one episode of I'm Alan Partridge as a tax inspector. She turned up in that, but she wasn't like a big name actor or anything. And things she's done since then, she was in a show called Lab Rats with Chris Addison. if you remember that, it was 2008.
I've heard of it. I've never seen it.
She was in Ideal, Johnny Vegas show for a while. She was in that.
I saw a few episodes of that.
She was a regular in Life's Too Short in the Gervais world.
Okay.
And other things like that. She did turn up her most recent credit in an episode of Afterlife. And The Job Lot, which is set in a job centre. She was a regular in that. She was one of the main characters in that. So she's been all over the place, but never had that kind of major lead role that people remember her for. Mm-hmm. Which is a shame. She's a great performer, and there's some really lovely moments in this episode. And she's
good in this.
In a lot of ways, this is quite an unusual episode in that we focus so much on one very small story, and it sort of forms around a guest star who we sort of never see again.
We'll come back to Brian and Beverly in a minute. So remember, it's singles night. We're still working our way around the room. Paddy now spots young Mary behind the bar, who is Holy Mary, who's one of our cast members. It's her daughter.
Yeah.
It's her daughter, and played by Sian Gibson.
Yes. Sian Fulks at the time, before she married, she was at uni with Peter Kay at Salford Uni with Steve Edge, I think, was there as well. And so they worked together a lot in those early days. One of Peter Kay's very earliest little TV sketch things he did it with her. He wrote it and then had one of his characters, and she brought him with him. The Services, like I said earlier, is Peter Kay and Sian Fulks. That's like she's the only other credited actor in it.
Well, I think Sian Gibson, she was on Taskmaster, but I think she's probably best known for Car Share, with which is a very much a double header. Although she was recently in The Power of Parker with Conleth Hill, which I thought was I really enjoyed The Power of Parker. It was a sort of period sitcom set in the 80s.
Like I say, she did a few things with Peter Kay kind of early on, and then didn't do much for a while. Did get married, had kids and stuff like that. Often that changes your priorities in life. Maybe she wasn't as career focused for a while. But apparently, as I understand it, when Car Share came along, they offered it. The people who created the idea went to Peter Kay with it, and he was kind of like, okay, if I want to do this, I want to kind of form it around me a little bit more. So he didn't write it as such, but
funny that.
Yeah, well, but. And he went to Sian Gibson and said, I think we should do this together. We work together really well. Let's kind of improv this and make it our own and blah, blah, blah. And apparently she was working in a call centre at the time. She hadn't been on TV for 10 years, and it was a real kind of comeback for her. And obviously that has raised her profile significantly, and she's done a lot more since then. But that was that Peter Kay friendship paying off again, 10 years later.
I think she's great. I've got a lot of time for Sian Gibson. I think she's brilliant.
Yeah.
She don't have a lot to do in this episode, to be perfectly honest.
Yes, the next episode where it all pays off. This is actually saying, which is an interesting point, actually. I think Phoenix Nights does a really good job of being episodic, but having elements that follow through. Having overall character arcs. Like Jerry worrying about his health and getting the all clear and things like that.
Mm-hmm. That said, the A-plot of this episode, which is the relationship with Beverly, that is done, and no spoilers here, that is done and dusted by the end and never referred to again.
It's completely episodic, yeah. And so that's what I mean. I think they do a nice little job of that. Even that bit with Sally Lindsay being that's just played out over 4 episodes now. In that he thinks Rayvon is a murderer, and now he's not. And it's just given us one gag each episode. That's all it is. And but it's just enough to build the world. And I wanted to talk about world building a little bit. And I wanted to talk about it specifically because I think they do a really good job here. Like we said, we have all these supporting characters and we don't get a lot of fleshing out with them, but they feel like fully rounded characters. We kind of feel like we know the world they're in. But I want to talk about it specifically in the context of single camera show as opposed to fourth wall audience, 3 camera setup. Because filming this in the way they have on location, it affords you a bigger cast. And this allows for, we can have a character that comes in and does 2 lines, like Justin Morehouse as young Kenny in this, maybe have 1 line this episode. If you're bringing someone in for rehearsal and then they have to come in for a recording day and blah, 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 people don't want to do that. But if you can just turn up for a few days filming, here and there, in amongst your other stuff, it's kind of not so bad. It's also the advantage of working with people who are not known and don't have any work and will take what they can get.
Have their obligations,
But yeah, I think in a way that, say, The Office doesn't. The Office could work on, here's your set, it's an office. Here's the secondary set, it's the boss's office. Or The Royal Family. Yeah, it's one set. Phoenix Nights feels like you couldn't do this in an audience setup. Not just because there's too many sets, but because that world is a little bit too wide and you would have to narrow it down. Yeah. And I'll give you a really good kind of like-for-like comparison. A show that Neil Fitzmaurice was in a few years later called Eyes Down, which was set in a bingo hall. Paul O'Grady was the kind of main name of it.
Yeah, I remember that.
That is a studio-based comedy audience sitcom. And it is a totally different tone. And it just feels like a smaller world. And they have scenes in the bingo hall where it's much bigger and they've obviously filmed that stuff before. And then you cut to like the staff canteen and they're all just doing their small thing. The rhythm of the writing has to be different because you have to be able to perform it as live, so to speak.
So are you saying that it's because of it's not in a studio, it's not in front of an audience, it's just more naturalistic? And that plays into what we were saying before about how it's really well observed and these are essentially real people.
Oh, definitely it's more naturalistic. I think the point I'm trying to make in this particular context is it allows for a wider sense of the world. I think when you're doing a studio-based sitcom, it's this office, it's this home, it's this front room that we're living in. And we don't get much of a sense of the wider world.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I think you're right in that the world is well built, and that I think that is down to the characters. And I think it is because the characters are so real. They're slight caricatures.
Can you have that sense of reality if you've got an audience laughing at you directly?
No, you can't. That takes you out, even subconsciously, it takes you out of the reality of it. You are watching a show.
Yeah, maybe that's what it comes down to.
It goes back to the mockumentary thing. This is not a mockumentary format, but we are fly-on-the-wall observers rather than turning up to watch a show.
And just to make the point, The Office was a mockumentary, fly-on-the-wall spoof. It never really felt like it was, but it was. But that was tapping into exactly the same thing.
So we see singles night play out. It's all very sad, very pathetic. We see Les desperately trying to chat anyone up, and he's having no success at all. And then we hear what his line was. What was his line?
I'm horny. Horny, horny, horny. Because
which is a payoff from a thing earlier about song lyrics as chat-up lines.
Yeah. Which that little conversation with them right at the beginning, just the four like lads stood around chatting, and they're saying like, oh yeah, song lyrics, that's a good way of it. That felt like a very natural conversation that is just like, I can just see the three of them, the writers, sitting around going, okay, song lyrics that could be used as chat lines, let's throw some things out. Yeah, blah, blah, blah.
But we end the night as the lights all go on, time to go home.
Yeah.
And Brian and Beverly are still sat together talking. They've hit it off.
We missed when Ray Vaughan plays the slow dance number to finish the night. The erection section.
The erection section.
Okay, we're going to slow things right down now as we enter the erection section. That's right, if you've met somebody tonight, get them on the dance floor. If you haven't, what are you still here for, you losers?
Shut up.
And there's a bit where Steve Edge is dancing with an old lady and she's just like smoking over his shoulder. The fag ash drops on his shirt.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we've got time for this week, I'm afraid, but do come back next time where we'll finish our conversation about Phoenix Nights and obviously looking at all the actors we haven't looked at yet. In the meantime, if you'd like to throw in your opinion on any of the sitcoms we talk about, then where's the best place to do that? Social media. Yes, we are on Instagram at BritComPod, but honestly, the best place to go is Facebook. Search for British Sitcom History Podcast on there, you'll find us, and that's where people seem to comment and we actually get some nice conversations going and a bit of back and forth. That's what we want, so try that out. I don't use Facebook either these days, but that's the only place I talk to my mum, so there we go. It's still there, let's use it. Thank you very much for listening, and do come back next time. See you later.